Right. I realize that before we go on to looking at our sawing PPE, personal protection equipment, we better take a step back and discuss ever so briefly the kind of bugbear of COSHH, Control of Substances Hazardous to Health EU regulations. I had to produce these in the early 2000s when I was at Cambridge, and it took me about a month to go into writing what we call now safe operating procedures for every stage of what you do for thin sectioning. I no longer have what we say the SOPs, the safe operating procedures, but I do have the cover letter, and really what it's saying is that you have researched, you have written your safe operating procedures, and you are making your students aware of these operating procedures and the risks. And once they've read through those, then they have to sign the form to say that is the case. And usually COSHH can go, say, within a plastic wallet and put on the wall of the laboratory so that, in any event, a student can go back to that document, say they forgot the safe operating procedure for sawing. They can review it, they can assess that risk again, and then they can proceed with what they want to do. Of course, all of this has to go within discussion with your safety officer, and they should be very aware of your safe operating procedures, the chemicals that you use, the risk, and they literally should be also signing off after you prove that you are safely operating within the lab. So a copy of COSHH should go to the safety officer or safety office, and a copy of the COSHH should go signed within the lab. As I say, I don't any longer have those safe operating procedures, but I do have a couple copies of safe operating procedures that I can briefly show you. I got a copy from Sterling, and what they did, every laboratory really chooses to do this in their own way, in their own style. I chose, and Sterling chose, to produce one overarching COSHH document. And what it did was to say every stage of what happens for thin sectioning was described in steps 1, 2, whatever it took. And then after it was described, what Sterling did was put into a box the personal protection measures and equipment that should be used for that stage of the operation. Nice and simple, nice and simple. What I did was the same thing, but then I didn't box it, I just labeled it as the PPE for that stage and then described what that was in italics. One large document produced. The whole document is read again by the students, and it's lodged as a copy within the lab, so it can always be referred to, and also signed either at the front or the back by the students who are actively working within the lab. Another way of doing this these days, and I've heard that this is the newest way to approach it, it's producing a chemical hazard risk assessment form. Now, I gave you in your pack of papers, I had to fill this out for impregnation at the Department of Geography, because that is where I performed all my impregnation work. So this document, in a way, describes what is being done, what chemicals are being used, what is their hazard, and what are you doing to prevent the risk of what you're practicing and the chemicals that you're using. Not an SOP. It doesn't go through step by step the protocol. This is just strictly a description of what you're doing and the hazards it presents. And then again, geography, and I've heard recently other departments lodge this within the lab, and a copy goes to their safety officer for referral if need be. Now, the simplest form I've seen, and this probably, goes for multi-purpose, multi-use labs, or say you've got a group of researchers each doing something different. This is produced by Geography, and it's a simple Excel sheet. But again, this is just a hazard risk assessment form, and it's asking, what is it that you're doing? How much are you storing for chemicals? How are you using it? The frequency you use it in a day? Exposure levels, if there are any at all? And what is your PPE? What are you doing to bring the risk down by using your PPE and say your fume cupboard, chemical storage? What are you doing to bring that risk factor down to a minimum level? And that's a nice, simple form, which can be renewed every time you have a new researcher within the lab. However, I tend to like Sterling, because if the lab itself is just going to be dedicated to thin sectioning, impregnation and thin sectioning, and overarching safe operating procedures document with risk assessment and recommended PPE within the lab, I like the overarching big document. There's no question. The students have that available to them at all times within the lab, and they have to sign it probably on a yearly basis just to show you that they've remembered best practice. So what I might do is, if you need some help writing your safe operating procedures, let me know. I'll send you copies of these documents so that you can have a look through, and you may want to develop your own style for this. In fact, you may already have a style, as I know you have already got some labs up and running in the Department of Archaeology in Newcastle. So it is something to review, to sit down with your safety officer and discuss, and then decide how you're going to approach this fairly tricky matter, because it is something that takes time, but in the end it actually is something that everyone takes far more seriously, and it covers you in the responsibility for the students that you're overseeing. And that's become extremely important these days. So I'll send these all up to you. And as I say, let me know if you have any questions or need help.